Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. There was a terrible story in the news last week. It involved a father murdering his own son, and then being shot by the police. Let me be clear here, I am in no way defending this man or his actions, and I have nothing but contempt for anyone, male or female, who abuses or murders children. But this story led to a discussion on a Sunday morning radio program about domestic abuse. The conversation was gendered with a male equals victimizer, female equals victim stereotype.
I think a lot of people don't realise that those people who are being victimised, the constant fear they live under. I mean, every day you wake up and wonder what's going to happen today. Will this person turn up on the doorstep? Will I be the subject to violence? That this nagging fear that not only for the wife or former wife, but the children as well. The atmosphere of terror.
Absolutely. This is what I find so much in my work, that when I do a review or an investigation into a situation where a child has been harmed or even killed, I invariably find some bastard, excuse the language, some evil, bad-tempered, gutless person who's involved in a reign of terror over a woman and children. That's not mental health. That's just absolutely cowardly actions from a lot of the men in our community.
So, Bernie, how do we... I mean, there are many crimes I don't get, but this one in particular, I just don't get it. I don't understand it in an relatively affluent society like Australia, how we have such a huge domestic violent rate. So how do we then prevent these gutless bastards from doing what they do?
Yeah, look, and this one is imponderable. I mean, this one was, we talk about avoiding this, maybe this is unavoidable. These are just so unexpected that nobody can predict them. They're unpredictable. You cannot predict that a person, even one of these swines that I'm talking about, but you can't predict that a man would go and do something so heinous. So one would expect that there is an aspect of, mental illness there, but certainly this has happened, and it's just so unexpected and out of the blue.
Okay, so
nobody could predict it.
Let's turn it around, Bernie. Bernie, you are Premier for one day. You're given all the resources, and they say to you, OK, Bernie, what is one thing we need to do? And no one can guarantee child safety, I understand that. But what's the one thing we really need to do that you think would make a difference?
I think we need to protect women and children when we come to situations like a courtroom, or when these dads have got a situation where they're wanting to have access to kids. We go to court so often, and the dads are given a break when, in my opinion, they so often haven't earned the break.
So is that a change in the law?
I've described a children's court in the past as a parents' court. We must be looking at the best interest of a child in every situation.
Okay, so is that a change in the law that the politicians can do, or is it a change in the interpretation of the law, which it must be the judges and magistrates?
I think it's a change in the interpretation, because the children's court and the family courts are basically there to protect families and children. I just think that you get a lawyer, and it's a whole new story.
Well, there are many fathers that are good fathers. The marriage might have broken up, and they're not going to harm their ex-wife, or they're not going to harm their children. The problem would be, I would imagine, the court sorting out the bad guys from the good guys.
Yes, that's right. And that means that the right people need to be looked after and listened to. I'd be running these courts and listening very hard to the opinions of social workers, and in my case, having been a youth worker for many years, youth workers who can actually give the court the absolute guts of what this story, what this family is all about. And when it comes to the development or the condition of a child, be listening to the voice of people who have got expertise in child development rather than a lawyer who's just running a line.
And of course, we've got the situation where people think that their children are their possessions.
Yes.
That to me is terrifying. You know, I can't have them, nobody will. And
Yes.
and we've seen this, these crazed fathers, you can look at them and think, I mean, we've seen what's happened with in the past few years, and you think they're doing this as a form of vengeance. They're taking away this child's life as a form of vengeance.
Yeah, it's really sad and sick.
It's
But
terrible.
you're right. At a whole range of different levels, I see parents seeing children as their chattels rather than people.
Bernie, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good on you.
Okay, Bernie
Thank you,
Geary,
Bernie.
Victoria's Commissioner for Children and Young People.
I tell you what, he has the toughest gig going round.
Oh.
I don't envy him 1 second because, unfortunately, he's right. I probably, the saddest
look-
thing that he said is, unfortunately, this sort of violence in some stages is inevitable.
Do you
And that
know,
is terrible
with
to
all the
deal
problems we have today, at least we talk about it. Years ago, people could go in desperation to
That's
the
true.
police about,
Yeah.
being bashed and whatever, and they'd say, it's only a domestic. That was, and it was shoved out. It wasn't treated as anything important. And people absolutely lived in fear and terror, and they still do.
And to his enormous credit, Ken Lay has actually made it almost like a personal crusade to change those attitudes and to get domestic violence out of the home and into the public arena, and he should be given great credit for that.
Calls are coming up on a Sunday morning at 29 past.
Until noon, you're listening to Sunday Morning.
Cheryl, good morning.
Oh, good morning. I'd just like to draw your attention to the fact that I work in the medical field, and last week I happened upon some GPs and clinical notes which suggested that the patient had suffered domestic violence. And I read on further, and it said that the patient had suffered a fractured eye socket, severe bruising to the side of the face. And I just think that the word domestic violence trivialises, which is just common, plain assault. And I'd like to see that phrase wiped from our vocabulary. And the definition, it's not a true definition of what's really happening out there. It softens it and makes it fuzzy.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said there's anything soft about the expression domestic violence. But I also, Cheryl, as I understand it, and you'd be able to help me because you work in the medical industry, that doctor then is obliged to report that, isn't he?
Well, I'm just a little underling in the medical field, really, and I mean, I don't know what would go on with the GP in this position, but
I know there is mandatory reporting certainly for violence against children. I would have
sure
thought
that's probably happened.
Yeah, maybe a doctor can ring and let us know, but I would have thought for domestic violence as well, or domestic violence against a wife or a partner, I would have thought that's mandatory reporting too.
I would
hope
assume
so.
that, but I just think that domestic violence is such a fuzzy and it covers such a myriad of events.
It's a bit like recreational drugs.
And the king hit, which is the coward's punch, that sort of thing.
Domestic violence I would never have described as being anything like recreational drugs. I mean, domestic violence has the word
Violence is
in
violence, that's it.
Yeah.
To Jennifer, good morning.
Good morning, Darren, John and Nick.
Yeah.
I just was saying to the girl, I actually shot my husband on June 28th, 1975. I'm still going through hell with that. I served, I got a period of 5 years with a non-period of 6 months. I got out of jail in 6 months. This happened in New South Wales, not down here. I have 3 beautiful daughters. I was fighting. I don't really remember shooting my husband, but this is the other side.
You were a victim, Jennifer, just quickly. You're obviously a victim of bashings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got married at 17, and for many years I called myself a self-made widow because I was widowed. Well, I was shot, and I won't say his name, sorry, at 27. But I was lucky I had a good barrister and all that. I wanted to be charged with murder because I'd done the wrong thing. I was a nurse. I don't actually remember pulling the trigger. But as a psychologist or a psychiatrist told me, everyone walks a fine line. And it only takes a split second to get over that line, to go one way or the other. And I've got 3 beautiful daughters now, 16 grandchildren and 4 beautiful great-grandchildren. I'm in their lives, but he's not. And in those days, you didn't get the help.
Now, you must have been driven to despair to do that. What has it been constant bashings and what?
Drink, and he'd never touch your face. It was always your body.
Yeah.
Hey, boy, Jennifer, where did you get the gun from, do you mind me asking?
He actually kicked my father with 2 other men previously 2 years before in 1973, and he died of a massive heart attack, my father, who was only 54 at the time. And I adored my dad, and he didn't go to jail. He didn't get charged. He got let off. And I think he hit me once too often, and in those days you just went and bought a gun.
Oh, you went and bought one.
And so, Jennifer, obviously what happened to you was horrendous, but it was 35, 40 years ago. Do you reckon, looking as an observer, and obviously a very interested observer, do you think there are better facilities now for women who were like you 40 years ago?
I honestly I can't comment about Victoria, but at least in my hometown as it was then, it's called the city. It was up in the New England area.
Yeah.
They got a women's refuge that changed a lot of men around the town because I'm such a quiet, shy person. I mean, as I said, I was a nurse, and no, it's affected me still today. You think that you just, that I don't remember firing it. I mean,
were you in fear of your life?
Oh yes, always. He held a knife to my 3 daughters, and they were only 10, 8, and 6 when this happened, and it was hell for them. But my mum and stepdad, they took them for the 6 months when I was in jail in Sydney. But at first I hated that job, but then I met different people because I was in the hospital part, and but no, I'll never forgive myself for it. Never. Because I could have walked away, which I did on one occasion, but they always come back and say, oh, well, I'll never do it again.
Oh, yeah, the old story. Yeah.
So
I'm changed
you ladies
now.
out there, don't ever fall for it.
Yeah.
No, I look, that just be drummed into people. Don't fall for that act.
No, John.
Yeah,
no.
and you know what it is? I'll tell you the thing that drives these people crazy. You're their plaything. You're not a person to them. You're their plaything. And the moment it's like depriving a child of their favourite toy, and they'll throw a temper tantrum. So the moment you've removed yourself from them, they nearly go crazy because they haven't got that person to victimise. No. They need the victim. They want the victim. That's what keeps them going. So when you say, I'm not going to be a victim anymore, that's what drives them nuts.
He could be sober or, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for calling in, Jennifer.
Hey,
we really appreciate it. And one point if you can hold on, Jennifer, I think the producer wants to have a quick chat. But the one point that Jennifer...
I've been meaning, sorry to interrupt, I've been meaning to ring up Neil, but I just felt a bit more comfortable ringing the 3 of you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Now, that's a compliment.
She's obviously considers Sunday morning People's Day.
That's right. We've
Jennifer,
made today People's Day, Jennifer. So, and by the sound of it, Jennifer, it's a long time ago, and life's pretty good. I
know somebody who her husband hit her severely once. And she said, this could be the beginning of the rest of my life. And that was that. She'd gone. She took the kids and left.
Thanks for the call.
And I think basically she was right. She said, I'd seen other women that had, he'd say, I'm sorry and whatever. And then it all starts all over again. So she was very wise. Get out.
Until noon, you're listening to Sunday Morning.
And at 2 to 12, Anne, good morning.
Oh, good morning. The major problem for women in violent marriages, especially if they have young children, is that if they want to leave,
where do they go?
They have nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. And why doesn't the state government or whoever has the job provide low rental places, even if it's just for a few years, until the woman can get on her feet?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all very simple, and so many people look at it simplistically and say, well, just walk out. But you've got to have somewhere to go, haven't you? Particularly if you have young children.
Yep.
And particularly if the overbearing husband has really sort of beat you into a pulp.
But that's where the system has got to come in and defend the woman. They've got to come in and defend the family.
Because the abuse is not just physical, it's emotional as well. And emotional abuse leads to a lack of confidence from anyone thinking that they can go out and make it on their own. It's a horrible situation.
I should point out that the previous story featured on the show concerned a homeless man being murdered. Despite the majority of the homeless being male, and the victim being male, this discussion was not gendered. They used terms like, the homeless, not homeless men. And I believe this was the right thing to do, as not only males are homeless, or victims of murder. I could understand talking about male homeless specifically if the topic was, why are the majority of the homeless male? But a general discussion about homelessness should not be gendered. I make this point because the same should apply to any discussion about domestic violence. It is not something only males do to females. Females also do it to males, females do it to females, and males also do it to males. There is not only one gender who is always the victimizer, and only one gender who is always a victim. Australian government figures show that 1/3 of all domestic abuse victims in Australia are male, as males are less likely to report domestic abuse, or even to be believed. I think it's safe to say that the 1/3 figure is probably much higher, and more in line with recent overseas studies showing that domestic violence affects males and females roughly equally. But if we were just to use the accepted government figures of 1/3, which by the way are not very well publicized, then why is it acceptable to ignore 1/3 of the victims, and 1/3 of the victimizers? It's also interesting that they talk exclusively about fathers killing their children, and ignore the fact that children are more often killed by their mothers. Looking at Homicide in Australia, 2006-7 National Homicide Monitoring Program Annual Report. It states the overwhelming majority of child homicides, 85%, were committed by a parent. 11 homicides involved the mother killing her child, and 11 were committed by male family members. When the male family members statistic is broken down, we see that only 5 perpetrators were fathers, while another 5 were de facto partners of the mother who lived with the child. One father murdered 2 children. If you lump de facto fathers and fathers together, we find that mothers are just as likely to kill their children, but if we only look at biological parents, then only 24% of the perpetrators are fathers. A major local paper last week also ran an article on child homicide. The head of Victoria Police Family Violence Unit, Detsub Rod Juning, said children were more at risk of being killed by a family member than a stranger. Figures released by Victoria Police and the Coroner Office show between October 2011 and July 2013, 5 little boys and 2 little girls died in family violence incidents. The George brothers Philip, 9, and Matthew, 5, who died at the hands of their mother Anita at Clayton South on June 1, 2012. Their mother also took her own life. Devesh Sharma, 5, and his little sister, Divya, 3, who were killed by their father Niresh in their Glen Waverley home on June 1, 2012. Their father also killed their mother, Pritika, before killing himself. An 8-week-old baby girl, who, along with her twin sister, was seriously injured in April 2012. The child suffered skull fractures and did not survive surgery. Her twin suffered skull fractures and other broken bones, but survived. The girl's mother will face the Supreme Court next month on a charge of infanticide, and 1 charge of recklessly causing serious injury. A 12-month-old boy who died in his house in Richmond on May 15, 2013. His stepfather has pleaded not guilty to charges relating to the boy's death. A seriously injured 14-week-old baby boy, who died at the Royal Children's Hospital on October 23, 2011, after being transferred from Colac Hospital a week earlier. The Herald Sun does not suggest the child's parents or step-parents were involved. Victoria Police released their statistics as part of the Herald Sun's ongoing Take a Stand campaign against family violence. Detsub Juning said paternal killings were usually committed where there was a history of family violence, or a couple were in the early stages of separation. He said maternal killings were more likely to occur when the mother was suffering a mental illness or was the victim of ongoing family violence. That's up. Juning urged anyone who suspected children could be at risk of harm from a parent to call police or child protection. It's interesting that we, as a society, tend to focus more on fathers killing their children than mothers, as the radio program shows. But when we do talk about mothers killing their children, which we rarely do, it is always stressed that she was mentally ill. We tend to believe a mother needs an excuse to do such a horrendous act, yet we do not need to make such excuses for fathers.
That's not mental health. That's just absolutely cowardly actions from a lot of the men in our community.
We just accept that it's something some fathers do. But the good news is that there are some people telling the other side of the story. For example,
it's a really interesting point because it's almost got to the point now whereby masculinity is seen as a negative thing.
Yeah, the strengths of masculinity and manhood, unfortunately, are being used against men at times. Normal masculine strengths or their ability to perhaps assert themselves being misconstrued. Attacking fathers, for example. When was about a year ago, I went to the beach reading a book, just relaxing, and the peace in the environment was disrupted by a lady in the background that started shrieking, quite a lot of verbal barrage, and I quickly had a glance and she was actually verbally abusing her husband, and it went on for quite a few minutes. What struck me from that was a couple of things. He actually assertively responded to her. I was quite impressed in his ability to assertively communicate back. And that was particularly important role modelling for their 5-year-old son that was also in the middle observing this verbal barrage. But the other component was her turning around to her son and saying, "Your father's an idiot." And hands down, that's just wrong. So there's this demeaning of the father role in insults like that, for example.
I'm horrified to hear that, and I'm more.
I was horrified to hear it.
Yeah, but I'm also more horrified reading through all of these notes to discover that abuse against men is a whole lot more common than we think.
It is. Australia really needs to have this conversation. Where women were many decades ago in terms of the silent phenomena of domestic abuse is really where men are at now. I'm not sure if you're aware, our own Australian Bureau of Statistics, there's a statistic in there that 70% of male victims experience assault by a female perpetrator in the home. And that's a higher number than the female victims at 64%. Why aren't we talking about those numbers?
Well,
How's a man going
to talk about that?
Yeah.
Where's he going to go? Is he going to go to some authority and say, my wife is beating me or something? Well, they're not going to be believed, are they?
Exactly. This is part of the social influences and the social determinants of health that we need to really put onto the table, particularly in looking at a national men's health policy, because of these kind of issues. The kind of abuse a man may experience by a female perpetrator, a woman's not likely to pack a punch the way a male would, for example, but women abusers, unfortunately, may be very good at sugar-coated viper tongues. So there'll be a lot of statements that are hit below the belt.
Like, your dad's an idiot.
Like your father's an idiot, or you think you're a man, or you think you're good in bed. Another example in social media that we see quite often, or you might hear quite often and don't bat an eyelid at, are things like on the radio a few weeks ago. This particular radio station had a wife calling in to tell her husband of over 10 years that he doesn't sexually satisfy her, and doing that over radio. And I just wonder, would the radio have had the husband do that to the wife?
Yes. You raise a very interesting point.
How would we react to that? And yet we'd sort of go, ha, that's funny. And yet, is it really? You're hitting men at an important part of their identity, quite literally and metaphorically. You're hitting them below the belt. And it's very insulting to men.
We see it in the media often as well, don't we?
We see many images that we don't bat out an eyelid very much. So, yeah, away from the domestic front, we've got quite a few images, whether it be in video clips or commercials, that we kind of look at and go, oh, yeah. But if we were to reverse them, I wonder if we'd feel the same. So there's some examples we can look at here.
This is a Pink film clip. Now, she's being particularly aggressive towards this guy here.
Absolutely. Well, Pink's a great performer and she's got an awesome personality. I just want to hug her. It's just, we have a look at images like that, and
if that was reversed, we would be outraged.
Totally acceptable. We don't question that.
There
when we
would
look
be
at that,
an uproar, but that's kind of entertainment that we're having a look at there and going, hang on a minute, that's actually inappropriate and unacceptable behaviour. And we're airing it. So that's an example there. That role modelling to young girls or young boys is quite frightening. And when you have a look at Canadian research where they're looking at adolescent girls and adolescent boys and partner aggression, about 34% of the young girls admitted to hitting, biting and scratching their partner compared to 2.6% of the boys. And I think it was 18% of the girls used a weapon against their partner compared to 0% of the boys using a weapon against their partner. That research also showed that young girls observing their mother being aggressive toward their partner, the young girls would also significantly report being aggressive. And so that kind of role modelling, we're missing the point. So there's a couple of other examples we can look at.
Yeah, it's about respect, isn't it, Elizabeth?
Basic civility and courtesy amongst people.
You know, and that whole concept of fighting fairly and not reducing a fight to personalised name calling.
It's really learning how to fight back fairly. That lady I mentioned earlier at the beach, she, quite professionally speaking, needed anger management training. And so it's the ability to be able to treat people to fight back, teach people to fight back fairly. That's what I teach a lot of men, in being able to learn assertive communication skills. And I'm glad to say women also coming to seek help to go, I don't want to behave that way. I know I can feel my viper tongue coming out, but I pull back. But how do I express my frustration? And that's absolutely brilliant, that people want to learn how to fight back fairly.
Let's take a look at another example of this concern in the media. This is a fairly common, I think it's a transport accident commercial?
It was about speeding, a transport accident, that's right. Now, we have a look at this. Now, it's making a point about speeding, obviously, but here they're making an issue about the size of his penis, obviously, and equating speed with his masculinity and insulting him. Now, I'm not particularly seeing any ads about speeding females and the size of their breasts and any connection to their brain, for example, of which we could come up with some pretty crude
You can
images.
imagine if there was a blonde woman driving the car and the blokes, you know, looked at her and did
and
that,
sort of going,
we would be offended.
Or what's going on, like, are your brains in your breasts or something? I even cringe at saying it, but we would not put up with it. We would go, wait a second, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't be on the drawing board. It wouldn't be on the drawing board. And yet it gets to this point in these particular commercials and we're looking at it going, you go, hang on a minute, that is inappropriate. And unacceptable behaviour between people, and yet men are really being oppressed by it, and we're accepting it more toward men, whereas we would have an uproar toward women. It's really demeaning, and it's not role modelling.
So emotionally, how are men responding to this? I mean, what's the impact?
Men have actually, unfortunately, they're aware of it, but there's, psychologically speaking, they've like developed a learned helplessness in a sense, where it's just like, even if I do say something, I won't be taken seriously, or I'll be insulted, or I'll cop retaliation, or I'll cop the silent treatment. And as you were mentioning before, where do I go? Because when I report it, or I want to make a report, I'm either laughed at, or, come on, you're a bloke, be tough, or...
deal with it.
You mean she hits you? Nah, that's not possible.
Wrong with it?
What's wrong with you? And men are even experiencing that I'm less of a man because of it, feeling quite shameful about it.
Because they're copying it.
But the thing with abuse toward men is that the abuse, verbal abuse, emotional manipulation, sexual manipulation, or using children as negotiating tools, they are forms of abuse that are hard to detect and they're hard to defend against. So it tends to seep under the skin psychologically, that someone ends up a little battered, so to speak, or helpless, doesn't know how to fight back, and in the end gets so frustrated that they're just trying to cope and maintain an identity.
So just wrapping this up, so the Men's and Fathers Health Summit in Canberra has now recommended a mandatory review of all legislation. How significant is that move?
That is a very important recommendation that they've made. A lot of us were really pushing for an Office for Men status. Now, they didn't recommend for that, which I fully support that they didn't, given that there could be a risk of mismanagement with that. But the mandatory review of legislation and policy for its impact on men, for the reasons we've just discussed, are paramount, both on government policy level, domestic abuse front, and day-to-day level with some of the examples we've spoken about, because we're letting it slide and not stopping to question, saying, hang on a minute, if we had a man doing that to a woman and we showed that publicly, we would not accept it. Why are we accepting it for men? Why are we not questioning these things and having just as much of an uproar? They're important social determinants and social influences that are impacting on men's health, physically, psychologically, family and social-wise.
Tell you what, it's pretty shocking, isn't it? And that, of course, in no way takes away from abuse against women, but it's about recognising that it also happens with men.
Right, yeah. There's an important point to make here on that one in particular, is that there's the automatic assumption that it's an us versus them, that if we're defending and helping out men in this, that it means we're taking away from women. That is so not the case. It's about it being unacceptable and inappropriate, and we need to look at these images now and go, hang on a minute,
that's not right.
That's inappropriate.
Elizabeth, it's really good to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I do not deny that there are violent men. I would just like to see some acknowledgement that women can be violent too. Violence is not something done by men, it's something done by humans. It's about time we as a society acknowledge this.
Turned around and punched me in the head in front of a young bloke. She came in and was just verbally assaulting me. I ended up in a fetal position, sucking my thumb on the shower floor, just screaming inside, I can't handle this. And she was saying, you might have a doctor's filled, but you haven't got me filled. There's nothing wrong with you. There's never been anything wrong with you. I was ostracised from family and friends. I was constantly told that even my own family didn't want anything to do with me because I was mentally ill. I just turned around and I looked to see if there was a truck coming down the road, because I would have just jumped in front of that truck. A lot of shame. There was a lot of numbness. I went through a lot of depression. Rang up the Department of Community Services, and I was told by a woman on the end of the phone, sorry, I don't believe you because only men abuse women. You don't fit into any of our programs, we need you to do an anger management course. And I said, my ex spat at me, she threatened me with knives, she bit me, she punched me, she withheld money, she verbally abused me, and you're telling me I need to do an anger management course. It's hard to admit that you're in an abusive situation to begin with, because society says that females don't abuse men. And it took me a long, long time to even admit to myself that I was a victim of abuse. I became homeless because of abuse. I had nowhere to go. So when I ring up the government services, no, we don't believe you. When I told other people, they'd say, no, I don't believe you. And you know, the best thing that you can ever say to someone when they tell the story is just say, I believe you.